Good morning, everyone. Sorry, good evening, everyone. The Finance and Investment Cell of Shriram College of Commerce welcomes you to today's session of Shriram Financial Forum. We are honored to have amongst us our guest of honor, Mr. Ashish Kumar Chauhan. Welcome, sir.
Everyone.
Mr. Ashish Kumar Chauhan is the MD and CEO of Bombay Stock Exchange, Asia's oldest exchange, world's fastest exchange with 6 microseconds response time, world's largest exchange with 5,000 plus listed companies, and India's first universal exchange to offer trading across all asset classes. He is credited with reviving BSE and completing its IPO, which was oversubscribed by more than 51 times. He was instrumental in setting up India's first international exchange, India International Exchange, inaugurated by India's Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi in January 2017. Prior to joining BSE, from 2000 to 2009, Sir had worked at Reliance Industries, India's largest conglomerate, as President and Group CIO, Head of Corporate Communications, and CEO of cricket team Mumbai Indians in its formative years. From 1993 to 2000, he set up India's National Stock Exchange, NSE, primarily on technology, screen-based trading system, satellite communications network, equities and derivatives businesses, and Nifty Index, amongst his many responsibilities. He is considered the father of modern financial derivatives in India due to his work at NSE. He received several Indian and international awards, including the Distinguished Alumnus Award from both his alma mater, IIT Bombay and IIM Kolkata, a very rare achievement. He has also been awarded Digital Icon of the Year by Indian Express Group and ranked amongst the top CEOs in financial markets by Asian Banker, amongst the top 50 CIOs in the world by Information Week US. He is a member of several committees of government regulators and international associations. He is a member on the board of directors at IIM Raipur and NIFM Faridabad and has served as chairman of NIT Manipur. He is a distinguished visiting faculty at Ryerson University in Toronto and has honorary professor at Nottingham University Business School. He co-authored a book on the history of BSE titled The Temple of Wealth Creation. Sir has achieved so much that his list of accolades never ends. On this note, I would request Sir to now address our audience.
Thank you. So how much time do we have?
So we have time till 6 o'clock.
And do we want to do it sort of interactive or sort of a mix of sort of one way and then interaction?
So you could save the last 15 to 10 minutes to, we have a few questions that students have asked in the form that we had sent out. So before that, you can just address it as a one-way communication. Later on, I'll be asking you the questions that have come about. Is that
Sure.
Okay, sir?
Yep. Okay. Good evening, friends. It's an honor to be talking to you. For me, the topic is the evolution of Indian financial markets. I have been in part of the Indian financial markets from 1991 onwards, which is almost now 30 years, 29 plus years. And I started my career as a banker. And then I was told to be a part of the NSE in its formative years. And so in a way, pretty much from 92, that is 28 years, I have been part of the financial markets. Earlier, I was a banker at IDBI and then with NSE. And in between for 10 years, as the compare said, I was with Reliance Group. And then last 11 years, I am with BSE. The way I look at it is, what is a financial market? Finance is a very, very difficult thing to explain. All of us know what is finance, but we can't explain. If you search for a definition of finance, you will figure out that there is no specific definition. Everyone, it's like a large elephant, which is being described by a blind man. Wherever you touch, you describe that portion, but nobody knows, nobody can describe the entire thing. So markets are of various types, right? You know, the markets are for vegetables, markets are for electronic goods, markets are for houses. There are many types of markets, right? But the markets for capital or markets for money or markets for finance are unique in that you are basically giving something with an expectation to have something in return, which is not true with say markets for vegetable. You buy the vegetable from a seller, and then you go home and use it up. You don't go back to the seller unless it's really bad, and that is true with fridge or TV or a bulb or anything, right? So while as here in financial markets, you actually give your money for returning it back at some point in time. And also in between, you want some returns or you want the returns at the end of the period and so on and so forth, right? So these are markets for capital. Markets for money are different from markets for capital. Usually the markets for money are basically the markets where you borrow money, you rent money. So if you have heard of, or if you have read, because all of you are in commerce, and you would have heard of Marxism, you would have heard of capitalism. So I want to take you through this entire debate and understanding is that you understand the context from where all these things are coming, and then you will be able to appreciate the difference between the markets for money, which are called money markets, and the markets for capital, which is called capital market. Although they look the same, they actually both, on one side there is money, and still they have kind of different perspectives, different understanding of how these things happen. There are a lot of similarities. Even all markets have similarities, but the markets for money, markets for capital are very different from the other markets, because in that you want something back. The original what you have given, you want back, and of course you want something more. Of course, nowadays there is a negative interest rate also. So it is possible that you give 100 today to take back 99 after 10 years, and you might be happy. So that is the concept of the negative interest rates. But having said that, the markets for capital are basically the markets where you give something and you want something in return, but more. Why it is called capital market also has a very interesting sort of etymology. You've heard of per capita income, like GDP per capita, like India has GDP per capita of how much? $2,000. And America has a per capita income of $55,000. So it's like they are 27 times more earning income per person compared to us per head. So capita is actually head. And in earlier, in fact, have you heard of the concept of capital punishment? That is cutting the head of the person being punished. And that is basically because, again, the capita, capital, all of them come from the word capita. And that is basically, in earlier times, the wealth of the person used to be how many goats and how many sheep and how many cows and buffaloes and slaves they had. They were all heads. And that person who had too many such cows or such goats or ox, they would work and he would just sit idle. And so that was his wealth. And so, and they would of course work for him, plus they will also produce newer cows and newer buffaloes and newer goats and other things, newer slaves. And that's where basically they also produce something for him for consumption, but also for long term. And that's why all these markets for long-term assets, which produce something and then come back, at least in theory, are called capital markets, right? So while as money market is when you pay and then within a few short months or few short days, it comes back. So overnight markets are not called capital markets. When banks trade money among them on a very short-term basis, like one overnight call, if you heard of, between the interbank markets, they are like for a day, overnight. And so that's not called capital market, where you lend or receive money for a very, very short period. Whereas if you receive the money for a long period, and then of course it basically works on that, somebody uses that to give you returns, that market is capital market, right? So that those are minor nuances of even the money markets, the markets where you give money and then take it back. And clearly these markets are different because they are not the vegetable market. They are not the same as fridge market or anything, right? So those are broadly the perspective. Now, financial markets sort of consist of all this: markets for short term, long term, medium term, for loans, for everything. Everything is called financial markets. And why do we require financial markets? Like, why do we require vegetable markets? Because we need to eat vegetables, right? Why do we require financial markets? So finance, in my opinion, is like lifeblood to an economy. It takes the money, or it takes oxygen from place where it is available and gives it to all the small little places, small little cells across the body, into all animals, of course, and then takes away the bad part and gives it back for clean air. So in a way, like in the body, the blood performs a very vital function of taking nutrients, taking everything into each cell, and then comes back. But on its own, that red liquid, if you take it in a kind of a bag, a polyethylene bag, it's not of any use, right? Unless, of course, you put it into somebody's body. And so the blood on its own has no relevance. But blood in the body has tremendous relevance, because that's where the body sustains itself, gets all the nutrients where it is there, and from there into that particular cell, and including oxygen and everything else, right? So blood is a very important part plays a very important part on the body, but on its own, it is like it's of no use. Similarly, finance, when it's on its own, it is of no use. When it is inside the economy, it plays a vital role. And if the blood is purer, it moves faster, then it takes more nutrients, it nourishes the body well and keeps the person healthy. If it doesn't, then the person falls ill, right? So that is true with the finance also in an economy. It's able to channelize the savings, take it from the people who save to the people who actually need the money, small people, large people, the fairywalas, the readywalas, to the large industrialists. All of them require money, right? And the households save in the economy. So it has to take the money from the households into the sort of industry, and people who work, they need borrowing, and so they then work for, they produce, they give you interest back, and so on and so forth. So that's basically the financial markets: short term, long term, medium term. But they need to give back the money, and sort of also returns, even if it's for 1 day or 1 hour or 10 years or 100 years, right? So there are 100-year bonds, there are perpetual bonds also, which are available in the markets. And so you have literally infinite variety, because perpetuity is the infinity part, right? So you're from very small duration to very large duration financial markets available. And particularly the areas in which I work are what we call capital markets, which are basically for long term. The stock markets are for the long term. Since all of you are the students of commerce, let me also tell you some of the more interesting things about how the stock markets evolved. Stock markets, in some ways, has had a lot of things to do with India. And the modern, I mean, if you say the basis of the entire modern society, modern economy, one of the larger inventions, or perhaps the largest invention ever, because it's conceptual, it's such a large leap of faith, was the decimal system, decimal numeral system. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 0, right? So this was invented somewhere in India, probably 2000 years back, probably 3000 years back. And in a way, Indians were very smart at inventing it, but they were not very smart at distributing that knowledge. And they had a lot of knowledge. Old Indians had a lot of knowledge. But this was a particularly interesting knowledge. I mean, other societies had their own way to count, because counting is a natural thing, right? If you have more than one person, you have to start counting, right? And people used to do scoring. You know what is the meaning of score, right? Score in the cricket means you actually score, that is you scratch on a wooden bench, 1 run, 2 run, 3 run, 4 run, and then fifth is the another diagonal scratch. And so that's how the scoring used to happen, very preliminary. If you again have seen the Roman numerals, you might have seen that it's not easy to manipulate in terms of calculations, multiply or divide or add them up and stuff like that, right? So they were running with that. We developed this brilliant numeral system, but we didn't distribute amongst ourselves because we were a very hierarchical society. Only the top sliver of people who were basically controlling the knowledge ensured that no amount of knowledge will pass on except to their friends, relatives across India, but only that top sliver of people. And so it did not get hugely popularized. But when the foreigners came, actually they started attacking us. They also ended up taking a lot of things, including slaves, including a lot of jewelry and gold and all. But they also took this knowledge of numerals. And so the nearest attackers were coming from Afghanistan and then Persia and then Arab. And so this numeral system went from India into Arabs, and they started calling it Hindu numerals because it came from in India. And then the Arabs were also winning the Europe part, you know, the Spain and Italy and all, they started winning that in around 12th century, 13th century. And they took this numeral system knowledge, they took it to the Europe. And that's where basically it started being known as the Arabic numerals, because the messenger became the message. It was not known as the Hindu numeral systems in Europe. They were being known as the Arabic numeral system. Only later on, people figured out that origination was from here. So now it's called Hindu Arabic numeral system. This is a part of the history which many of us may not be there aware. We being Indians, we are taught this sometimes. But especially if you go to US, Europe, they are not even aware that the decimal system, which is like a foundation of all physics, chemistry, maths, even biology, economics, everything came from that decimal system, which was invented here, right here where you are sitting in Delhi or somewhere in MP. It's Aryabhatta used to be there, although he probably didn't invent, he just wrote about it. Probably 1,000 years before him, somebody would have invented and people would have started using it, right? So that is the Hindu Arabic numeral system has a story, which was, of course, it came from India. But the same Arabs ensured that the trade which used to happen between India and Rome or other places stopped when they actually won over a place called Istanbul, which used to be called Constantinople in those days. And that's why Europe had to find a new way to reach India, because India was a factory of the world. It used to produce a lot of goods, including good clothes, many things, which people in Europe prized. And that's where they had to come to India somehow directly, so that they don't have to pay taxes, their caravans don't get looted and stuff. So they started searching for India by sea route. And that time, a new theory had come in that the world is round. So if you go from Europe to west, somewhere you will reach the east. And there was a great guy called Christopher Columbus. He started going there. And the first amount of land he saw there, he thought it was India. He called it India. And that's why the people staying in America, where he reached, in fact, he reached the West Indies first, but they are called Indies. And India, and even today, the American native people are called Indians, is because they went in search of India. And there was another guy called Vasco da Gama, who came through the Cape of Good Hope and into near Cochin. And I think from Cape of Good Hope in South Africa to Cochin, he was brought in by a Gujarati seafarer. And that's how he came in. So India used to trade even through sea on the eastern side from Tamil Nadu, Orissa to Sri Lanka, and then to China, Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand, and other side 2,000 years back, and even 500 years back, 700 years back. And similarly, on the western side, it used to trade through the entire Africa on the Africa's east and also the Gulf through the sea route. But the Vasco da Gama came to Cape of Good Hope, which was somewhere at the last point, and then that is how he came into India. Uh, and the first few voyages of Columbus or of Vasco da Gama were actually funded by their kings. But later on, they required more ships, they required more material to be taken, and that's how they started getting together people's funds, and the voyages would be sent, and that's how they developed the concept of participation by unknown people into the voyages. Voyages used to be basically you have a large ship, you send the captain and the crew, they go to India, they try to kill people, loot everything. That's what they used to call trade. And then they take it back to Europe, and then they will make, if they started with $1,000 or £1,000, they will go back with like £1,000,000. And so that was the internet or e-commerce companies of those days, the guys who could come to India, loot people and take it back. And of course, then they made it much more organized using East India Company and stuff, but effectively of various types, East India Company of Netherlands, of Portugal, of UK and all. But effectively, that was the method that you put in X and you got like 10X, 20X of returns in a very short time of 1 or 2 years. And of course, there were risks because the ship can kind of go down in between, or somebody can loot it and things like that. So that's where they had to also do it in such a way that nobody's money is so much that that person would be feeling difficult when the ships don't come back. And so they started pulling their money together and started writing on a register the share each person had, and when the share in the profit. And so each person, when the ship came, each person had basically a predefined amount. And of course, the captain had to be also be enticed by giving some share to him. And that is now we know as stock options. The captain and crew, what they get is the stock options part, right? And those days also they ended up giving them something to make them happy, so that they actually come back to the same place and not take it to another port and sell it off, sell the material which they had got from from India. And so in register, there everyone's shares will be given, and then the ship goes to India, and probably it's going to come back after 6 months or a year. But you now need the money. You go to your brother, sister, nobody gives you money. But if you say, I have this share in this voyage, they might give you the money. And that's how the secondary market started, of the share being sold to third person, fourth person, like that. And that original person's name will be scratched. The next person's name will be put in, at least to the amount of share he has bought. And that's how this business started coming up. In the meantime, just few hundred years back before that, there was a Italian priest called Luca Pacioli. He wrote a book on the double entry bookkeeping system, and that came in handy to figure out what was the profit of this particular voyage. And then this voyage was like a one project affair, and they ended up creating companies, which was another leap of faith in that framework. In India, we used to have called guilds. Even Europe used to have guilds, and they used to still be trading amongst themselves and investing among themselves, which many communities in India even today do now. But they started taking money from anyone and everyone who wanted to put money in the voyage or in a new company which they were setting up. And that's where the company started coming up, which had multiple voyages. They didn't get over with a voyage, but multiple voyages. And that's where a new sort of set of people developed who will move around on the seashore, where the ships will come, the voyages will come, and they will say that if you want to buy shares from them in those voyages or those companies, they will sell to you. And if you want to sell to them, they will buy from you. And that came a special type of people who specialized in buying and selling, and they will call them brokers. And they, Europe being cold, they would also sit in the coffee shop during the cold times. And that's how the coffee shops of Europe, you started trading in this, what we call share of different companies. And that's where basically when those people became rich, they ended up creating their own building. And that's how they called it share exchange or stock exchange. The first exchange in the world was called Amsterdam Stock Exchange, which was set up in 1607, so around 400 years back. And it was like a guild of any type. If you go to Belgium now, you can see the office of uh, all the different guilds in any of the cities you go. Uh, these were like basically artisans or their associations. But effectively, this stock markets or share market or stock exchange started coming up. So I talked to you about India's contribution. One was invention of zero. That's how the double entry bookkeeping system also came. Then the companies started getting set up to come to India, trade with India, and that was another contribution by India. And so these three were very important for stock exchanges to happen. And then India became very important to Europe, and also it became part of UK's sort of running India. That's where the East India Company was set up, and many other companies were set up. Around 1820s, 1830s, banks started coming up in which were promoted by Europeans, but they were Europeans staying in India, in Calcutta. And they started issuing long-term bonds, which basically we used to know as hundi, while as they call it bonds, that I will pay you money with such interest. So you give me 100 rupees, after 3 years, I'll give you 120 back. And that's how this hundi or bond started coming up. They started getting traded from one person to another in Calcutta, because Calcutta used to be the capital of British India, not Delhi, till 1911. And so Calcutta became a place where they required a lot of funds for trading with China, the Opium Wars you might have heard of, with even slave trades which they used to carry. Bandhwa Majdoor used to be taken to Mauritius, Fiji, West Indies from India, even South Africa. So all that required funds. It is a very gory history. All of us are not taught that. Someday some of you will read and figure out how oppressive it was. Not that we were not oppressive to ourselves. Our society was oppressive anyway to 99% of its people. But this was even additional oppression which had come into our society. And that's how basically the Calcutta became a center of finance. The western part of India was not well regulated or well governed by Britishers till then. They were there as traders, and they had set up Bombay Port. Bombay Port, as you all know, came into the British hands from Portugal, because Portugal used to rule the western part, Diu, Daman, Goa, and large part of that area. But they ended up giving Bombay, where nothing was there, actually 7 small islands. And that was basically made as a fort. And a lot of Gujarati merchants were brought in from Surat, Parsis and Gujaratis, who were actually Gujaratis for 1,000 years. They were brought in to Bombay, and that is how Bombay was set. But it became a very important trading place for trading towards the western side of the world. And that's where the Indian, what I call Indian origin autonomous trading people developed. They were not under some Britishers, and that's where they started trading. They started cotton and other things. But effectively, they also figured that you need to invest money into the industrial companies like ship making, like textiles and all. That's what they understood, that these people are taking our cotton and then bringing back the finished goods in terms of clothes and all. That if you can make here in India, we'll make a lot of money. And that's how they started generating money from a lot of people issuing shares. And that's how in Bombay also, some companies started, some banking companies started, even their equities were issued. The ship making, you have heard of Bombay dyeing, right? It was basically the Wadia steamship and Wadia, you know, Nasli Wadia and all, their family. They were the ship makers of the western side of India. And they started issuing their shares. Some textile companies came up. And so there was a boom and bust in 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. And then a new group developed. If you have come to Mumbai and Mumbai Fort area, there's a place called Horniman Circle. Under a banyan tree, these people started getting together. And of course, there were many cotton traders there who used to sit with a lot of cotton there. And that's how in 1875, these people set up their own trust, an association of persons to act as stockbrokers. And it was called Native Share and Stockbroker Association. It was not set up by Britishers, but by native guys, Indians of Indian origin. And that's how I've been told that till 1925, even foreigners did not become members there or were not allowed, whatever the case. It was pretty much a Indian origin affair. And that's how in 1875, they put in 1 rupee each around a few people. And they set up this exchange called Native Share and Stockbroker Association. And that's how the Bombay Stock Exchange, later on, it started being known as Bombay Stock Exchange. It was set up under a banyan tree. And they would make a lot of noise, so other merchants will request or tell the police to throw these guys out, and they will go around 200 meters away into another street, which slowly became their house. They started buying up those buildings. And then that street was called Dalal Street, which is there even now where the BSE building is. And that's basically the story of how the Indian stock market started. The first stock market, as I told you, started in 1607 in Europe, in Amsterdam, and then London, everywhere the stock markets came in. But the Indian stock market started in 1875, so almost 168 years later. But it was the first exchange in the entire Asia. So that's how old it is in terms of the Asian capital markets. But what does it do? As I told you in the beginning, what does a stock market do or a financial market does is it takes money from people who have it to give it to the people who require it actually to do their businesses. And they don't want to give it for free, right? Because the money is their hard-earned money and they want to protect it and increase it. So this markets for equities is very different from markets for bonds or debt. In debt, you don't get an upside. You give in 100 rupees, you get, and you agreed to take 10% interest in a year. Then after 1 year, you will get 110, or after 2 years, you will get 120 if it is simple interest, but it's 121 if it's a compounded interest, and so on and so forth, right? So, but you don't get like 150 rupees. At most, you will get 121 after 2 years. In some cases, you may get 10 rupees each per year, and then you will get 100 back after 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, right? But you don't get that upside. Whereas the market for equities is actually market for participation or partnerships, where everyone puts in money, and if that business does well, then everyone gets to have that share of proportion in the profit, as I told you about those voyages and all, right? So that's where the equities market differ from the bond markets. BSE, I mean, any exchange would run both bonds and equities market both, and that's where there was a earlier they would trade by putting a finger, I mean the handkerchief on the fingers of both the parties negotiating, and they would basically negotiate with the movement of fingers. Today also in jade, you know, you heard of jade, the stone, the green color stone that comes in Myanmar border. They actually trade by putting handkerchief on the hands of the two parties who are negotiating with their fingers. So that it's non-transparent. Only two people who are negotiating know. But then came blackboards and then came floors. The floor became a technology where people will go together. There would be a place defined for a particular company or company starting with A. Even now today, if you come to BSE hall, which used to be trading hall, you have like on the each pillar of the hall, it's written A, B, C, D, E, F, G. So all the companies starting with A, you should trade from a pillar at A, or pillar B will have all the companies starting with the letter B. And that's how the technology all over the world was from 1607 onwards. Pretty much that's how it evolved. And then once you trade, later on you have to also settle. You have agreed to buy something, then you have to pay money, and the seller has to give the stock or securities or shares. And that's how then finally you are the broker, people who are trading on the floor, and behind them are the sub brokers, and behind them are the sub brokers, and then the final clients. So that's how it used to be across India. You had to trade like in Chandigarh, sitting there as a, or in Delhi sitting as a investor. If you are to trade on BSE, then you would call up your next door neighbor. He will be a sub broker to somebody in Bombay. Then the Bombay guy will tell his broker, and then that broker will send somebody to trade on the floor. get the details, and by the time you get the information, it'll be like 7, 8, 10 days. And a lot of misappropriation used to happen, a lot of mistakes used to happen, a lot of cheating used to happen those days, and not only in India, across the world. And so you might have bought the share at 100 rupees on the floor for you, but the agents, which are the brokers and sub-brokers and all, they might tell you after 7 days that they bought at 110, and you had no way to find out. So that's how the Indian markets were working, but across the world, in Japan, in Europe, in US, all those markets were working in that same floor-based methodology. So from 1875 till 1991, India was working that way. And in 1947, India became independent. And then the BSE was given given the recognition again by the government of India by passing a new act, which was actually old, but again, India had to reconstruct the same thing. So in 1956, 1957, they nominated all the exchanges in India. By the time India had like a lot of number of exchanges. In fact, by 91, India had 22 exchanges. So there were 100-year exchanges, 100-year-old exchanges like Bombay Stock Exchange, Calcutta, Ahmedabad. All of them were old, more than 100 years by 1991. But there were other newer exchanges like Patna and Kanpur and all, Hyderabad. There were new exchanges which were wanting to come, like Saurashtra Stock Exchange in Rajkot, which were finally not allowed because by the time things happened. But from 1947 to 1991, we were primarily trying to be a socialist country and did not give importance to markets, because markets, especially capital markets, are considered very bad, whereas banks are considered very good. Today also, we don't allow banks to fail. Even if they make mistakes, government puts in money, which is taxpayers' money. But when stock markets go down, nobody was bothered because they thought it was a play for the rich people and it's a speculative den. And only in 91, when India became sort of bankrupt as a country and we had to literally send our gold for a very short-term loan because we did not have money for even importing 7-8 days of goods which we are importing from abroad. And that's where we realized that we need to open up and we need to give importance to the capital markets. And that's how liberalization, what we call liberalization, started. And that time the finance minister was in 92, Manmohan Singh, and the prime minister was Narasimha Rao. And the market started going up, and the policymakers in Delhi thought that because they were liberalizing, this was happening, but the markets were going up. But they did not realize that there was a broker who was taking money from banks in a clandestine way, using some forgery, and using that money to put into the stock markets, which was taking the prices up. So when the scandal came about, it is now known as the Harshad Mehta scandal. And in 92, the entire market collapsed by almost 40–50%. And the government said that if you have to give importance to the stock markets, we need to create most modern stock markets which are transparent, fair, efficient, and gives equal opportunity for everyone sitting anywhere in the country. And that's how they set up a committee called Firwani Committee. And the committee recommended that you need to create a model exchange which will give technology demonstration to other exchanges, and they will become smart in being transparent and so on and so forth. But it didn't happen that way. The government told the largest financial institution those days was IDBI. They told IDBI to set up the National Stock Exchange of India, and the IDBI selected 5 people. I was one of the 5 people who were selected to set up NSE. And I was like 25-year-old, just 1 year into the job after IIT and IIM. And I was basically, I had just completed 1.5 years of my job. And I was the youngest. I was also an engineer, which my other 4 team members were not. And so I had to do all the technology work. I had to also do work which my seniors did not want to do. So like getting tea, coffee, to basically doing interior decoration, to signing agreements for premises, and all sorts of grunge work I had to do because I was the youngest. And one of the reasons why I want to tell you that part of the story is that in your life also many things will come where you may think that that's below your dignity to do that work. Please don't do that way. Whatever work comes your way, try to do to your best of abilities. And probably you will learn a lot out of even making tea or cleaning premises or constructing premises, which you may think is not your main skill. But try doing that. You might, who knows, you might add some skill to your own self, which may last you and make you a better human being, better worker, better manager, better leader going forward. But that happened to me, and I ended up doing technology. I'm a mechanical engineer. I'm not a computer science. Those days, India didn't produce too many computer scientists, but I had learned a little bit of programming in my IIT days, and also a little bit in IIM too. But effectively, I was novice to the computers, how they were set up, how they were working, or how the telecommunication system worked. But I learned by reading books. I set up the satellite telecom network first time for commercial purposes in India, where the satellite is 36,000 kilometers on top. Nobody had seen, I mean, of course, the scientists had seen, but other people had not seen how it worked. And so I had to work on that. I had to work on making lease lines, creating screens, making them work, and things like that. And so my engineering, in a way, worked slightly differently, but it did work for India in some ways. And we set up the NSE, and it was screen-based trading where you could place orders from buy and sell, and then the computer would match those orders automatically if you decide to match them, or they could match. So if you say, I want to buy Reliance share at say 100 rupee, and the other guy said that he wants to sell Reliance share at 99, then it is a match, because you want to buy at 100, you want to sell at 99. So that is basically, even if you were to sell at 100, it will still be a match. From 99 to 100, anywhere it's a match, right? So that's how it will match. So I made those algorithms. We brought software from outside, but manipulated or managed it or modified it to our requirements. We created all these things, and we started this highly technical screen-based exchange. And many people thought this will not work, because just before us, there was another exchange set up almost 3-4 years back called Over-the-Counter Exchange of India. Some of you might have heard of it. It was having similar aspirations, but it wanted to do only for small companies, while as we wanted to do for the large companies also. Although it was not our mandate, we ended up doing large companies. And so that exchange had failed, and people thought technology had failed. But we learned the lessons from the failure of that, and we created this technology. We created this framework by which a lot of people could trade across the country in less than 2 seconds. And I still recall, in Mumbai, still people were used to trading fast, because they could go to BSE, go sit in a broker's office, and few minutes or at least few hours, they will get the information. But I went to inaugurate a terminal in Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu in 1995, first terminal of BSE outside Mumbai. And I placed an order for them, and it came back matched in less than 2 seconds, and they could not believe. And they thought I was doing basically faking, or it was a magic. But when they could settle, they figured that there's reality. And it's not very far, 25 years, it happened in front of me. In some ways, I was responsible for that. But that magic took India to become the pioneers in the automation of the trading part of it. After that, the rest of the world became automated after looking at that experiment. NSE became larger than every exchange in India in less than 11 months. It started trading on November 3, 1994. It was a Diwali day. And before the next Diwali, before the next November, it became larger in October of 1995. And that's where basically the automation came into state. Before that, people had very, very odd opinions of computers. Only one large project, which is also internal to an organization like Railways, was done, Railways reservation system. But for public usage, no large computer systems were developed in India for public usage till 1994-95. And this was the first real experiment. And people thought these people who are not even able to understand English, the traders and brokers, used to trade in Gujarati. They used to speak in Gujarati. But how will they trade using computers? They don't even know English. And somehow they took it to the entire trading framework in a very short time. And it became a humongous success. And then we ended up setting up a margining system to ensure that the defaults don't happen. People put in, whenever you trade, settlement happens after some time. So you had to put in some margin to ensure that even if you default, we can use that money to pay up the other side. And so we created a clearing corporation to guarantee settlements. We created depositories for the shares, to keep the shares like bank accounts in bits and bytes, not in physical. That earlier the shares were physical. Even now, some portion of the Indian stock market is still physical, but you can trade a physical share in Indian stock market now. You can only keep it, but when you want to trade, you have to what we call put it into the depository, and then you can trade. So that was in 1998. A new act came in called Depositories Act, Indian Depositories Act, and that's how the depositories were set up. And then later on in 2000, we started derivatives market. So I had started working from 1995 onwards on setting up the derivatives, what we call futures, options, hybrids. In 2000, we started that. And so we had to set up a new index called Nifty, which many of you might be familiar with that. I was also instrumental in making that. Before that, I had created another index in 1994 called NSE 100, which we scrapped and made the NSE 50, which popularly became known as Nifty 50. So the derivatives came, and then in 2007, India went and allowed foreign exchange trading in the stock exchanges. So that's how the FX started trading. Indian rupee against dollars, against Great British Pound, against yen, all those things started trading. And then the commodities were allowed to trade on screens around 2002, 2003. Earlier, commodities were, futures were traded in floors, like black pepper or potatoes or turmeric, but now they all trade on the screen. And slowly the regulator, which was allowed the ability to regulate markets around 94, a new act came in, SEBI Act 94. And so they became very entrenched now. And they started, they got merged into the Forward Market Commission, which was a regulator of the commodities around 2015 or 16. And that's where now we have one single market for trading in equities, equity derivatives, currencies, mutual funds, commodities, IPOs, and many things. And that's what broadly what we have achieved in last 25, 30 years. It's pretty much the most advanced markets of any type in the world today. BSE trades at a speed of response. When you place an order, you get a confirmation in less than 6 microseconds. In 1 second, there are a million microseconds, 10 lakh microseconds. So we give you a response at 150,000 of a second. That's what we claim. But we would usually give you response time in 1 or 2 microseconds. That's 500,000 of a second. Now you might think why humans can't decipher beyond say 22 frames in a second, like in a movie. They pass 22 frames and you think it's a running movie. Why do you require to go like a millionth of a second? It's because now large portion of the orders are not placed by humans. Almost more than 90% of all orders in India today are put in by computers, and there are algorithms which have been set which think and place the orders. They don't ask a human whether I should place or not. They are just placed by algorithms, and more than 60 to 70% of all trades are now done by algorithms only in India. And that is true with the rest of the world. And that's why the computers can decipher even a billionth of a second. And that's where basically we had to upgrade our systems to trade. We are the fastest exchange in the world. And of course, the other side, the companies which trade, their shares trade, also have to give us a lot of information. So we have automated the process of disseminating those information to the public. Of course, there are television channels, our website is there, and our mobile applications are there, which are seen by millions of people every day, literally when the markets are on. So effectively, our markets are amongst the most automated, amongst the lowest cost automated markets in the world. And whatever you do here, many of those skills will be useful abroad also in the fast moving markets like US, Europe. And so that's basically the story of the Indian stock market's evolution over last 145 years, but largely over last 26 years since the NSE started equities market in 1994. It's 20 years pretty much getting over, 26 years pretty much getting over. And it's one of the most fascinating journey of how the markets, how the one single technology of trading changed even after I set up those technology for stock markets using the SATCOM, satellite communication. The ATMs started coming up because ATMs were not even possible before that. And those days, mobile did not have the data connectivity. So they ended up using my own technology to also set up the ATMs later on. And then when when the GSM became data oriented, and then of course now 4G, 5G will make it even more impressive. But effectively, the satellites were kind of saviors of India, and India became very important in the world market, even from IT perspective, largely because we set up such large projects of national importance in 93, 94. That became technology demonstrator that Indians are very good at technology. And that helped when the Y2K problem came, year 2000 problem. Try to read it up if you're not heard of it. But India became a technology superpower, largely because these technology demonstrators were very instrumental in creating that confidence in Indians that we can do it, we use it, it's not a great thing. And my hope and request to all of you is that use technology, explore the technology as and when new stuff come in. And that is where you will be able to create great wealth. So I think we'll take the question answer now. I hope this was useful to you.
Yes, sir, definitely. There's no doubt about that. We have few questions that students have asked. The first one would be, around the world, national economies are contracting, including countries like the US, Japan, and even UK. India also in the last quarter. However, stock market keeps hitting new all-time highs every day. So this makes it evident that the financial markets are not a fair reflection of the current economic situation. So, what are your views on this?
See, again, as I told you, the financial markets are not the vegetable markets or fridge markets, right? So when the demand of vegetable goes down, the prices should go down. But imagine if the vegetable you could store for next 100 years. And those vegetables could grow even more vegetables. So today, there might not be demand for that vegetable, but after 2 years, 5 years, there might be demand, right? So you wouldn't sell it at a kind of a scrap prices, which is what the vegetable sellers do at, say, 11 o'clock in the night, right? So we tend to put it in our minds, and no television channel, no economist, no experts have either understood or no, they don't want to, some of them might have understood, but they don't want to explain. Why I'm telling you this is, last 1 month, I've been asked this question at least in 50 places at different, even on television. And my argument is that these markets are for the assets which are going to give you the profits over next 50 years. And their 50 years profits or 100 years profits, today their net present value is what the asset price today is. And the second part is that when the markets, the stock markets, value a company or an economy using that index, which is the reflection of the future potential of that economy, they take into account all the possible information which is available now, as of now. So till January, nobody thought that COVID disease will come and it will be so deadly. And so it was just going on. All the information available at that point in time was included, including all the risks which were known. So there are, if you have not read a book called Black Swan, you should read up. It's by a guy called Nassim Taleb. And there is similar concept called unknown unknown. I mean, if you have heard of Donald Rumsfeld, used to be the vice president of US. And he had, after 2001 World Trade Center collapse, he had a framework called known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. Unknown unknowns is what you cannot plan for, which you cannot price in your economic activities and in your index. So this COVID came in as a completely unknown unknown or a black swan. And that's where the market went down 40%. The vegetable prices did not go 40% down, or other things did not go 40% down. But the price of the stock market, the index, went down 40-50% across the world. And then people realized that, and of course in February, you might have also heard that India will probably have 20 crore cases by August, September, and probably 4 or 5 crore people would have died, right? Indian origin experts from abroad, especially US, came and started frightening us, which is a good thing. That's how we went into the lockdown and then further lockdowns and stuff. But effectively, India managed well. The rest of the world managed well. Even after this 6-7 months now, world has probably 2 crore infected and a few lakh dead. India also has probably close to 50,000 or a lakh dead, but it's not like crores dead. So the economies have managed. The disease is deadly, but not as deadly as people feared in February. There have been way to manage, and we actually cut the risk of losses or deaths by going into a complete lockdown. And that's where slowly that COVID part also started getting discounted. And slowly people realized, investors who put in money, they also realized that it's not as deadly as it was made out to be. And that's how they ended up taking it up a little bit. The third reason, this is also interesting, is that over the last 40 years, the governments of the world are now allowed to print infinite amount of money if they feel like. And whenever there is a crisis that happens, whether it happened in 2001 World Trade Center crisis, or in 2008-9 global financial crisis, or 2020 COVID crisis, the governments of the world, they put in a lot of money, either by way of fiscal, that is by distributing money, or by way of monetary policies, that's the federal reserves of each company pumps in a lot of money as additional. And so once you have a lot of money chasing the same goods, then the prices go up. So there are two reasons why the prices have not gone down, or they have gone down, but they have slowly come up across the world, not only India. And they are not different from, but they are actually reflecting the economic condition much better than what our current economy is, because they are looking at next 30, 40 years, and nobody expects today, at least, although who knows, tomorrow the COVID may become even more deadlier and a lot of people may die and people may stop buying things, and then the profits of the companies collapse. That might be a different, altogether a different reason. But currently, too much of liquidity has been put in. In fact, in first 3 months of the COVID period, governments put in across the world together 3 to 4 times more than they had put in money during the entire global financial crisis. So they literally pumped in too much money by way of wages to people, by way of income in their hands, by way of giving loans to the large corporates, small corporates and all. And that's where basically that same money has now gone back to the markets. And those guys are basically, you might have heard of the Robinhood traders who, there's an application called Robinhood in America where young guys sitting at home in lockdown, trading on the screen. In India also, a lot of people are trading on the screen, not doing jobs because there is nowhere to go, right, in lockdown. And that's where a lot of people are trading. That's also one of the reasons that liquidity is chasing. But second thing is the economy's reflection as reflected by the stock market is not for only today. It is for next 30, 40 years, right? And that's where you can see that it has not gone up to 42,000, which was the highest peak. It is still around 39,000. But why it has gone up is that COVID is not found to be as bad as it was projected in February, and the liquidity is changing, right? So those are the two reasons.
Okay, sir. So we have one more question. So it was heard that SEBI may soon allow investors to directly invest in the markets, thus cutting the need for brokers. How likely is this to be implemented, and how can it impact the overall market?
So in a way, the way I look at it is there are functions to be performed in life, right? And those functions have sub-functions. So sometimes an entity or an institution or a group or a company performs many of them functions together. And then when the new technologies allow those functions to be performed in a more efficient way, it goes like, as I told you the story, the screen, I mean, the floor was the larger part of the technology which was used, and then the screen came and the floor kind of got eliminated. But the people who used to go to trade on floor, we call floor brokers. And they were just specializing only on trading and not even doing other functions which brokers perform. There were other people. And so they lost their jobs, right, those days. Now the technology has reached where you can directly trade. And all the other post-trade functions like clearing, settlement, risk management, also many of you may be able to do directly. Today also in some areas, we allow direct functioning like banks. They want to do hedging in Forex market. They come on to BSE and trade directly. They don't go through the brokers. So we do allow in a what I call a limited way. Of course, they become broker, but effectively they are trading more nobody but for themselves, which is called proprietary trading. There are many such large network players who trade only for themselves, but take our membership cards and do it. So effectively, there is no difference between that framework and this framework. Today, you can trade through mobile. In fact, if you want to do it on a mutual fund, you want to sort of buy a mutual fund or sell a mutual fund, which you have. We have a framework by which you can directly do it. And many large companies use it. It's not that you may not be able to do it even in equities market, but there are many functions which need to be performed, not only the trading. Trading is only a very small sliver, very important sliver, but small sliver of activity. There are many other things which are required to be done, like settlements and other things. Once that becomes clearer, if we don't allow ourselves to do that, somebody else will set up a new exchange which is allowing trade between people. Of course, the regulators, currently the entire, all the laws require the stockbroker to be in the middle. If that has to be allowed, direct trading in equities market, that will have to be done by changing laws and all. So it's slightly away, although it is in the newspapers that it might be allowed soon. I would be surprised if it is very soon. But clearly the technology does allow, and so somewhere along the line, India will allow, if we if you want to remain pioneers, which we were in '94 in automation, we may do it faster. In fact, there is one more news item which has come, is that T+1 settlement. Today we do T+2. That is, if you trade today, we do give you the money or stock in your account, bank account or depository account after 2 days. That is today, being Monday, we give it on Wednesday. While as the Economic Times article last week says that the government or the regulator may want to do it on T+1. That is, today being Monday, you have to do settlement on Tuesday morning. That is like 9 a.m. And that would require a lot of changes. But if we do that, we would be the first country in the world to achieve that. Today, T+1 in equities is not done in terms of settlement anywhere in the world. But in terms of BSE's own technology, today we do, like in mutual funds, in money market funds, we do settlements even in T+2 minutes. You trade now and we may be able to take your money in 2 minutes from wherever in the country you are and give it to the mutual fund immediately, right? So we are equipped to do this, but the laws and other things will take some time. So I don't think that's going to be so soon.
Thank you so much, sir. So as the session draws to an end, I, on behalf of Finance and Investment Cell of Shriram College of Commerce, would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to you, Mr. Ashish Kumar Chauhan, who took out time from his busy schedule to share his insights on the topic. I would also like to thank Ms. Saroj Joshi for all her support, professors of SRCC, and all in attendance for today's session. Thank you for making this session such a success.